This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
Hello, I'm Clement Tan, and you're listening to Asian Insider. Joining me today is Bhagyashree, the Straits Times DC bureau chief. Today, she will be talking about some of President Trump's possible priorities as he prepares to be inaugurated for his second time on January the 20th. Hello, Bhagyashree, and welcome to the show.
Hey, Clement. Glad to be here.
Maybe let's just start with kind of a first broad question. President Trump has been making a flurry of announcements and pronouncements since he got elected in November. Judging from, what we've been seeing or what we've been hearing, what are likely to be some of President Trump's priorities?
Yeah. So, like you say, the countdown to the inauguration has begun. And there's so much speculation as to what he's going to do. What he's going to do on day one, for instance. The moment he's sworn in, that's going to happen around midday. And then, if you believe the reports in the press, there's already like a bunch of, I think, maybe 24 executive orders that are sort of ready for him to sign on. And then you were talking about the announcements and all that he's been making. So even on the campaign, he's talked about wanting to end the Ukraine war and end the Middle East conflicts. Obviously, while during the campaign, he said he's going to do that even before he gets to office, right? Even before he's inaugurated. So I think he's somewhat come down on that. He knows he's got to be realistic. But I think we can expect those two things to be very high on his list of, things to do. Then you've got some very concrete things like issuing pardons for some of the 1,500 people who were arrested during the Jan 6 riots, right? So the riots on Capitol Hill, by people who believe that Trump did not lose the 2020 election, and they created disturbance on the Capitol Hill as congressmen were certifying Biden's victory at the time in 2021. So he wants to pardon some of them. Then there's a whole list of things which have to do with his immigration-related priorities. So he wants toward carrying out deportations that he's promised of illegal immigrants. And there's like between 11 million to 22 million of illegal immigrants in the US. So he wants to start by sealing the border and then by deporting, mass deportations. So that's quite controversial. Not quite sure what he'll end up doing. He might make some, I guess, formal beginning to this or some symbolic beginning to this. But it's so large, the scale of the problem is so large that he might not be able to do everything that he's promised. And the other thing that gets a lot of attention is the fact that he's promised to end birthright citizenship. This is also controversial because this is something that's guaranteed in the US Constitution. So how do you, you just can't become president and decide to end it. You have to secure a vote in Congress to do that. But anyhow, you probably will hear him talk about it. Then let's talk about the economy. So on the economy, he has a whole lot of things that he also wants to do, starting with ending a lot of corporate regulation. That's big with him. And actually, that's exciting a lot of people, a lot of corporates in the stock markets as well. Then the other thing he wants to do, and this is towards making things affordable for his voters, bringing cost of living down. He thinks he can do that by making large oil fields and gas fields available for drilling and fracking. So that probably is something that he'll probably sign off on day one. And then there's tariffs. So probably Mexico and Canada, where he's clearly said he wants to use them as a wedge, right? To get them to try and stop the inflow of what he calls criminals and drugs. Basically to curb the, all the illegals who try to enter the US from Mexico and a fewer number of them from Canada. And then similarly, traffic in fentanyl, which is a deadly drug, causes the deaths of many Americans, especially young people. So that's on his priority list as well. And I think we should also expect that, the Paris Climate Agreement, he wants to exit that and probably will right in the first week, even if not in the first day. So those are the kind of things that are being talked about a lot.
Right. Sounds like a whole litany of
you bet.
Some of it are complete reversals, but I guess some of them are not too surprising, right? Because in his first term, that whole climate change thing was
Yes,
one of the things that he did, but
right.
President Biden was quick to also reverse when he took office
Exactly.
in 2021. But I think one of the more surprising things, I think, even though they were on very good terms leading into the election, was, I don't even know what the word to describe it, or what to use, but the whole thing about Elon Musk now being
Oh,
put together with Vivek to kind of form that department looking after government efficiency. I mean, the acronym is Dodge, which is
yes,
kind of like a crypto thing.
yes.
I'm just wondering though, you already see some possible kind of like fissures and disagreement. I mean, some of the headlines that you see coming out of the American press is like Musk versus MAGA. And I think one of the things that H1B visa
Hmm.
issue that has been raging, the last couple of days, last week or so. Do you think this kind of, I mean, Musk was kind of a surprise, even though they were very close in terms of his position in the cabinet. But do you think moving ahead, this whole H1B kind of disagreement that's playing out very publicly is a sign of things to come with the Republican Party and Musk?
Yeah, I think so. And actually, this is a question that goes right into the heart of Trump presidency. So you're right. Elon Musk is being called the first buddy, and people who've been quick to pounce on the rift that's appears to show up within the Republican Party, and especially within the Trump supporters, his MAGA base, and Elon Musk. So people are calling it like a civil war within the MAGA universe. So the core of the thing, especially what came to the fore because of the H-1B visas that you mentioned, again, it's something that's very close to Trump's own presidency and the promises he's made to his supporters. So this whole thing basically is visas for highly skilled professionals, right? And as a lot of tech workers come to the US using this visa, I think almost 70% of these visas go to Indian software engineers. Musk himself used this visa, the H1 visa himself. And his company too has, I think, hundreds of workers who are on that visa. So he, along with the rest of Silicon Valley and the tech bros, as they're called, Vivek, you mentioned. So all these people are behind the idea that this H1B visa process needs to be streamlined. It needs to be made easier. It needs to be made more fair, and you need a lot more of them. The bigger idea that you need more high skilled people to come to the US because the US faces a skills shortage, and then it needs to maintain its edge, its tech edge when it comes to rivalry with China. So this is what they want. This is what they vocally ask for. But then at the same time, this is something that goes completely against what Trump's MAGA base wants. So as these people are on the opposite side of this equation, they look at immigration as a dirty word. They're the ones who want the borders closed. And there's a bit of a confusion there between illegal immigrants who come in and who are obviously not covered by this H-1B visa. But in public perception, the whole thing has sort of got mixed. And it hasn't helped that Trump himself has kind of played both sides of the divide, right? So in his first term, as you would remember, he restricted the availability of H-1B visas. And then, of course, during the campaign, you can't forget that he talked about immigrants poisoning the blood of the country. He talked about the immigrants eating the cats and eating the dogs in Springfield, Ohio, just months before the election. So this is something that rings very much with his base. But then the question, of course, is where does he really stand? As it does with, I think, almost any Trump announcement. So if you go back to, everybody was waiting to see on this particular H-1B visa issue, where does Trump stand? Which side is he going to come down on, Because on both sides, he's got these supporters. And of course, as we know, just a couple of days ago, he said he supported these visas, that he uses these visas for properties, his own properties, to employ people in his own properties, which is actually, again, a bit confusing because H-1B visas are not the type of people who are going to be cutting
Yeah,
grass on your property, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, I mean, who are the people? So maybe there is this speculation in American press that he's confused. He's talking about different categories of visa, H2B, H2A, H2B visas, which are for lower skilled professionals. But then the point is watch what he
mm,
says, as it is with all of the other pronouncements. And then the key thing for him politically, of course, that he's got to manage the expectations of his base. So if he
right.
gives way to Musk on one side, he probably will make some other populist gesture. right? And one other takeaway from this whole episode and the whole rift in the party, you cannot dismiss the idea that there's a bit of an racist kind of element to this.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that Trump is racist, right? There is this diversity among his voters. And you can see diversity in the people he's picked for his administration as well, right? But then there is this underlying racist tension, I think, that can be seen in the American society and its politics. And this is because of this demographic transition that's happening. So the white Americans, which are a majority, they will become a majority minority in about 20 years, which is to say they will remain the largest population group, but they will no longer be more than 50% of the population, right? So this kind of thing has stoked all kinds of cultural anxieties. And well, Trump's got to address them because he came to power stoking those anxieties, right? Now, what we probably will see is that the Trump's base will be satisfied by the efforts he makes to secure the border and maybe with the deportations of the hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants who came in. So it remains to be seen how he does it. These tensions are there to stay. And one way or the other, they will keep rising to the fore. And I think you will see Trump sort of weighing in and, using his charisma to get past all these things. But yeah, it's opened a rift and it's there to stay.
Yeah, I'm just really curious. Like the rift is also with Canada, right? Trump calling Trudeau a governor of a province of the US. I mean, obviously, we hope he is just making a quite tasteless joke. But I think you could also argue that Trump came to power on the back of, like what you said, the demographic transition and the diminished white power, right? Or at least the perception of that, because no dominant group is going to so-called give up their dominant position without a fight, in a sense. But I'm curious though, like all these things about, it's almost xenophobic on one hand and racist on the other, because in terms of the way Trump's foreign policy, I think it's extended to the way he's viewing almost the world. And I think the biggest thing is China for Trump. How do you think he's going to handle China? So far, it's a lot of rhetoric. I think you keep hearing, even from the Democrat administration of Biden, that the last couple of years, it's quite strident, right? And you hear noise from the Hill saying that actually this is one of the rare issues, China that is, that has attracted kind of bipartisan agreement. It's just a matter of intensity in the way they object to Chinese dominance in many, many areas. So how do you think Trump would actually handle China moving forward?
Right. So let me circle back to one quick thing, because we just talked about the demographic transition and the kind of anxieties it's leading to. So I do want to be careful here to not portray the whole American society like that, because there are sections of people who feel discomfited. Usually these are people maybe with lower skills and education who are also a large part of Trump's base, right?
Right.
And of late, they've become more vocal. So there's an element of that, but, just to be careful that we don't, characterize the whole, exactly.
Yeah, because there's a conflation of many, many issues. And,
exactly.
And some of these working class kind of sentiments can come across as being quote unquote racist because of how things are conflated. Because as if we were to look at the broad kind of party of people who voted for Trump, that there is a lot of kind of like nuance in there. So you're right. We need to be very, very, very careful about labeling an entire society being a particular way, because there is the reason why Trump came to power this time around is also, that working class people turning against Democrats and going for Trump, as we have previously talked about.
Right. Yep. So coming back to your question on Trump and China, right? So if you want to look at that, I think a first place to begin with is to look at the people who are handling foreign policy for him. Of course, Trump is his own man, but then you do have his foreign minister, that is to say the Secretary of State. And that's the nominee is Senator Marco Rubio.
Yeah, I'm just kind of quite surprised, like how normal that choice is. Because he has been a pretty conventional kind of candidate among his at least for
Yes.
non-Republicans, he would seem a little bit more conventional compared to the rest of the options. So what does this mean for his foreign policy then?
Right. So, I mean, in Rubio, you do have a practiced hand, right? I think he's been a senator for at least a decade now. So, and he's part of some high profile Senate committees as well, which look into foreign policy and intelligence matters. And, he's a very well known China hawk. So, for instance, a lot of bills which scrutinize China's actions, which limit its activities, investments, and whatnot in China, they all came from him. Meaning he was part either sponsoring such a bill or he definitely voted for it, right? So his views on China are pretty much well established and in the public sphere, that he does see China as an adversary. And like you say, he's a noble choice in a sense that he's a more conventional choice. He's not sort of for instance, a Fox News host who's suddenly a cabinet nominee, right? So this
Right.
this is a well-known person. But you look at the other people, for instance, you have Mike Waltz as the National Security Advisor, which is again a very important post for foreign policy and security matters. So again, you have someone who, both of them are very hawkish on China. So that would tell you that between Biden and Trump, probably that expectation is that the rivalry is going to continue. It might become more pitched, especially when tariffs enter the conversation. So I guess it's anybody's guess as to whether Trump will go ahead with the 60% tariffs that he has threatened to impose on China. 60%, it's like, I think that trade is probably worth 500 billion or so. So, Trump's claim is that we can tariff them and we can earn money through that tax. And that's good. That's good for the economy because then that money can be funneled into other activities which support American industry. But anyhow, the point is the talk about tariff definitely means that there's going to be some turbulence. The other part of it is China's most favored nation status as a trade partner, because under WTO rules, you are entitled to non-discriminatory treatment, right? You cannot treat your trade partners differently. You have to follow certain rules. And if the US goes ahead and cancels what we call the permanent normalization of trade relations with China, this act, if it's cancelled, then that's going to remove the most favored nation status for China. And then Trump is pretty much free to impose whatever he likes to do on China. Now, that bill, a bill for the cancellation of this PNTR status, was introduced last year, or actually earlier this year. Last year now, of course, we are 2024, we're moving into 2025.
Yes,
so
we're recording this on New Year's Eve, so yes. Yeah.
Yes. So Marco Rubio actually was one of the sponsors of that bill. There's a bill in the lower chamber and the bill in the upper house as well. So he was the endorser of this bill in the Senate. So of course, this current Congress is ending and the new Congress will be sworn in, and this bill might be taken up. And you do have a clear Republican majority in both houses, even if it's a slender one. And this bill can pass, and that might cause all kinds of chaos to come through. But I also ask you to look at one other element, and which is Elon Musk himself, right? So we spoke previously of how he's called First Buddy. And some people even call him President Musk.
Right.
To say just basically, to say that here is an unelected person and who has such a lot of influence on what Trump is saying and doing, right? He has Trump's ear. Now Musk has a lot of valuable investments in China, including his Geiger factory, right? For his Tesla motors. And a large chunk of his sales, his revenue comes from what's happening in the Chinese market. The question is whether the presence of Musk and whether the presence of other people who are, I guess, veteran businessmen from the world of private equity or hedge fund, whether those people, billionaires who've made a lot of money doing business with China, whether these guys will act as some sort of moderating influence on Trump's China policy. That's possible. And we're talking of maybe even the Treasury Secretary being off this mold. The other thing is, I think we should also pay attention to what Chinese are saying about Trump, because one half of China policy is what Trump says, but it also depends on how China reacts.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
So if you follow what Chinese government is saying, they will say they have given all kinds of hints as to how they might retaliate. And they've already done that. For instance, initiating scrutiny on NVIDIA, right?
Yep.
And imposing their own import restrictions on rare earths and all these things. But then if you also pay attention to what the others are saying, not the government themselves, maybe think tankers and so on. And from what I've been reading and talking to these people, it seems that that they would like to reach a deal of some sort. So if I had to make a call overall on Trump and China, I would say there's going to be turbulence, and they have to find a common ground, and that process might be turbulent, but I think both of them do have stakes in wanting this relationship to continue. After all, it is useful to both of them to a large extent. And at the same time, I think we shouldn't shy away from saying that in the long term, or rather for a long time to come, they will regard each other as rivals. China is not a rising but a risen power, right?
Yeah, it's a power in its own right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is going to be that kind of tussle that will go on.
Right. I'm just wondering though, I mean, earlier in the election cycle, we heard about how China could possibly understand that transactional deal logic that Trump espouses. It would make Trump actually more predictable and understandable in a sense by the Chinese. What do you think of this kind of like thought or an idea?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's, I think, a number of people who look at it like that, or maybe who even hope it's going to be like that. Because if you treat Trump's pronouncements in isolation, everything he says sounds very alarmist, right? If there is sort of this expectation that he's only saying these things as a way of gaining an upper hand in negotiations, or in other words, he's transactional, as you say, if he will relent on tariffs, for instance, if China gives way in something else, maybe if it allows, better access to the Chinese market for a lot of American firms, or other things that Trump has in mind, or if it cooperates, and I think he has kind of dropped the hint on this, if he cooperates with Trump in trying to get peace in Ukraine or even the Middle East, if China can help Trump achieve his goals there, then maybe there's a bargain they strike in other areas, right? So I guess that is what statecraft is all about. And there is a very distinct difference in tone when it comes to Biden and Trump on China, because I think primarily it's this, that when Biden approaches China, he, or anybody else for that matter, his big thing is alliance building. You could say Biden is transactional too. I mean, as any country is, you're looking after your national interest after all, and you're looking for, and to come to an agreement on anything, you have to give some and take some, right? So that kind of process works. But Biden's emphasis was on, if, for instance, he's confronting China, he will concentrate on getting all of the European allies in one block, and then they face China. With Trump, it's not the case, because he's fighting off, with the Europeans as well, right? He doesn't have very kind things to say about NATO members, for instance, who are not spending on defense as much as Trump would like them to, not even 2% of their GDP. So there is that difference. And you can expect the personality of this president and the personality of Xi Jinping. Maybe it's a way of how they hit it off in the first instance, in the first term rather. It wasn't, they got on okay. I mean, despite Trump doing all kinds of things and China retaliating, and that set up trade wars, which of course disturbed all of us. And there is a school of thought that because China is in a weak position right now, when it comes to its economy, they will have less of the bandwidth to retaliate, because more of their economy is weaker at this point. So I think this push and pull, this tug will go on. It's inevitable.
Yeah, I think it would be, if Trump managed to pull off this whole grand bargain of connecting China and kind of compelling Beijing to kind of press its influence on the Middle East and Ukraine, wow, he would remembered as a great American president, because he managed to kind of bring about world peace in that sense. Maybe we have time for just one last China-ish related thing. What about TikTok? I mean, the social media the platform is kind of facing a ban in the US. Would Trump save it from such a fate stateside?
Yeah. So, of course, by saving TikTok, basically we mean that it continues to be available in the US market, right?
Right.
So, and the whole thing came to this pass because the US Congress passed a law asking TikTok to go find an American company to take over the stake which its Chinese parent ByteDance has in it. And this is why one day before Trump becomes president, that is to say on January 19th, unless the divestment happens, the app is going to start disappearing from the App Store. Of course, there's no sign that there's any buyer on the horizon. There was talk of some, but there's no imminent sale happening. And of course, you bear in mind that a buyer for the ByteDance stake in TikTok would probably have to fork out maybe 20 billion or so, because the value of TikTok itself has been put at about 100 billion. These are just estimates, something to go by.
Right.
Now, Trump unexpectedly weighed in when I think was it last week, that he asked the Supreme Court for a pause in implementing the ban. Right. And through that pause, he's basically asking the court for some time so that he thinks that with the mandate that he's got and with his deal making, he can actually strike some kind of solution so that the social media app, which is actually very, very popular in America, this whole thing can be settled politically. And in about 10 days or so, Supreme Court is going to be hearing the arguments. And then let us say Supreme Court agrees with him and delays the implementation of this ban, right? We don't know what they will say. They might not agree, but let's assume that they agree and they say, okay, it doesn't have to be going off, your app store on Jan the 19th. So what can Trump becomes president on Jan the 20th. What can he do? So one thing he can do is he can work with Congress to repeal this ban or to amend it. But because it's already the law, right? So you have to do that. But again, that begs the question, because just a few months ago, they passed that and it was a bipartisan, Joe Biden signed off on it. So it was passed. So how do you kind of do a U-turn on it? The other thing which Trump can also do, and this is how he might save it, he can say that, he has some kind of solution in the works. And he can work with Congress. He can, not the Congress rather, he can work with a provision which is in this act which banned the app. It says that he can have 100 days to extend this divestiture. So he I don't know what Supreme Court grants him, but let's say he gets 100 days to find some kind of deal and some American buyer has to be found. This is again in the realm of speculation. But the key thing here is whether or not there's an American who's willing to put up so much money to buy it. The question is ByteDance going to agree to that sale? Because in the previous instances, they have not agreed to it. And the sale, of course, has to include the sale of that algorithm, right? The secret algorithm, which makes this app so appealing, right? To users. Yeah. And in the past, as you know, China has opposed, I think even enacted a law to not allow such a sale to happen. But then the question is, well, TikTok Singaporean CEO, he met Trump mid-December. So what did they talk about?
That is the $1 million question. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So were there things happening behind the scenes to make some kind of sale possible? Is China going to be open to some kind of arrangement which allows that algorithm to be, shared in some manner? So some kind of deal making has to take place. Otherwise, I think TikTok's future is in difficulty, Okay, second scenario, Supreme Court says we see no grounds. This is a conservative Supreme Court. And although, at least 3 of the judges were appointed by Trump and they are a conservative majority. But then the appeals court turned down TikTok's appeal against this law to be implemented. And the Supreme Court can actually agree with them, right?
Right.
And so if the app is banned, what's going to happen is that it's not going to be available for download in the US. But if you already have it, you can keep using it until, let's say, it's no longer updated. Then it stops getting ads. It can't be monetized and basically dies a slow death.
Yeah.
Right? So there is one other controversial part which some analysts I've spoken to say, which is to say that Trump can refuse to implement the ban after taking over on Jan the 20th. The ban comes into effect on Jan 19th and Jan 20th, he comes into White House and doesn't let the ban actually happen.
He just pretends.
Which is weird.
It's just pretending it didn't happen. Like nothing to see here. Let's move on.
Yeah, but then, Congress can actually sue him. It's crazy. Congress suing the president. But this can happen. I mean, in some kind of,
Has it happened?
slim
Has it happened
possibility.
before? Like a president being sued?
Oh, I don't think so.
Yeah, it would be.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, how far back you
Yeah.
might have.
I'm just trying to like
couldn't tell
quickly
you.
rake my brains into the 70s and 80s. I can't remember unless my history is failing me right now, but I've never come across that reality. So,
Yeah, I mean, that would be quite crazy, right? Of course, a lot of them, I mean, Congress and president, of course, operate as two parallel authorities in a way. And of course, they cross swords. And of course, the government shutdowns that happen
right.
are an instance of Congress crossing president and, not agreeing to his spending priorities and so on. But this would be very serious. And if you look at it, Congress right now, the incoming Congress is a pro-Republican. It's a Republican majority Congress. So, it does seem like very unlikely.
It does.
And it sounds pretty crazy
Yeah, I
as
mean,
well.
who knows? Musk might be an issue again. And, earlier we talked about Musk versus MAGA. So anyway, there's a whole myriad of possibilities at this point. But one thing's for sure, life in the next 4 or 5 years will definitely not be boring. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure we'll talk more about these issues plenty moving ahead in the next year. But that's a wrap today for Asian Insider. My name is Clement Tan, and we have been listening and talking to Bhagyashree, our DC Bureau Chief. If you liked what you have heard, please share this podcast with your friends and family. This episode was also produced and edited by Faiza Sani. Thank you for listening, and have a happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening.